Hello, my holy sisters and brothers. A guten Erev Shabbos and a guten Erev Rosh Hashanah to you. Wow, we are on the cusp of a new year, 5784. We're entering Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos together. What a gift, what a sweetness God has bestowed upon us. We're entering the day of judgment. The day of judgment. We've been saying slichas all week, penitential prayers, getting ready, examining our souls, asking God to be kind and patient, to forgive us, on our knees, begging for a good judgment, on our knees figuratively, begging for a good judgment in this day of judgment, Yom Teruah, the day of blasting the shofar, although we don't blow the shofar on Shabbos. But it's very important to remember as we enter Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, when we'll be judged before the heavenly tribunal, a verdict, what will be for us for this coming year. That's the whole idea of the day of judgment, right? God issues a decree, what will happen to us in the coming year. The judgment is written on Rosh Hashanah, sealed on Yom Kippur, and not totally sealed until the end of Sukkot. But we are entering a trial, right? A judgment for our very lives. And the thing to remember is the fix is in. The fix is in. There's no guarantee, but as much bias in our favor as we could possibly ask for, we get that. Because the judge of the world, the master of the universe, loves us, adores us, is crazy about us, wants to find any excuse to give us a favorable judgment. And so we enter this with trepidation, but also with joy. Now, as we pray for a good judgment, don't be limited in any way, right? The judge of the world is who we're praying to, and the judge of the world adores us. So don't limit the prayers. Pray for perfect health, for explosive growth in all the areas of our lives that need growth, for a leap in livelihood, and for the arrival of Mashiach. The Messiah should come and redeem the world. And now this is a time of tremendous, tremendous opportunity. The doors are opening in these days of awe. For sure, we have so much to atone for. For sure, we've got to do that holy work, and with tremendous sincerity. So this aspect of trepidation, we don't ignore it. But there's also tremendous excitement to come before the heavenly tribunal and ask for everything. Ask for everything from the Holy One above. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Friday? John in Maine, Shandora. Wishing everyone a happy new year and a sweet year. Renee is in the house. Gordo from Scotland. Bill in mid-Missouri. Checking in. And Cecilia in Wyoming. And Christo. Wait, Christo. And yes, Mechilta. This is also a time of asking for forgiveness from all those that we may have wronged in any way, a complete asking for that. And I ask you, my holy sisters and brothers, please forgive me. I've made mistakes. I've led you astray. I'm not a rabbi. I'm just doing the best I can. But if I was insensitive, if I was in error, if I blew it in any way and caused you any kind of harm or ill will, I apologize. I apologize sincerely. We want to do that with all the people in our lives before, leading up to, and during the days of awe. Karen in Northern California, Bella in Florida, Marjorie says shalom, and Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Our daf is page 33, Lamed Gimel, here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 8 here in chapter 1, generally the obligations of a parent toward a child and of a child toward a parent. We've been talking about what is honor, what does it mean to honor our parents, and what does it mean to revere our parents. We picked this up near the top of 33a. The master said previously in the Baraisa, one might have thought that he should revere him, right? Revere the elders. And yesterday, at the end of yesterday, we learned that we have to show reverence and honor for our elders, whether they've acquired wisdom or not, because truthfully, anyone who's been on the planet for a long time learned something, and probably something very valuable. So we stand for our elders. People with white hair are our elders. When they come in the room, we stand for them. Right? Now, one might have thought that he should revere the people who are revered through money. Like, okay, somebody that we have to show reverence to when they come in the room, maybe we need to give them money. Therefore, the verse states, you shall stand and you shall revere. Leviticus 19:32. Now, just as standing includes no monetary loss, so too reverence is referring to an action that includes no monetary loss. And the Gemara asks, and does standing include no monetary loss at all? Are we not dealing perhaps with a case where the one who is sitting is piercing pearls, like he's a diamond cutter? A highly remunerative task. And in the meantime, he must stand for the elder and thereby neglect his work, which causes him a loss. I mean, you imagine that this diamond cutter working in the window on 47th Street in New York, every time an old person walks by, he has to stand up and express honor and reverence for the elder. He's going to interrupt his work many times a day. And that is highly paid work. So either he's going to cause himself monetary loss or he's going to cause his boss monetary loss. Is this what we're asking for? Answer, no. Rather, I'm saying, wait a minute. What am I saying? What we're saying is you don't have to give money to the elder, but you do have to stand before the elder. Well, if you're standing all day long, I mean, every time an old person walks by, this will create a monetary loss. So what about that? So rather, the verse juxtaposes standing to reverence. Just as reverence does not include neglect of work, so too, standing does not include neglect of work. Therefore, one who is engaged in work is not obligated to stand before an elder. And the verse also juxtaposes reverence to standing. Just as standing includes no monetary loss, as standing applies only when it does not entail neglect of work, as explained previously, so too, reverence is referring to an action that includes no monetary loss. So from here, the sages stated craftsmen are not permitted to stand before Torah scholars when they are engaged in their work, right? The sages were protecting employers, right? So if the employees got to stand every time an old person or a Torah scholar walked by, that would entail a loss for their employer. And then the employer might not want to employ such pious people, which, Has for shalom. We don't want that. God forbid. We don't want that to be the outcome of this law. So people who are engaged in a mitzvah, as we discussed previously, if there's somebody else who can do the mitzvah, okay, then they honor their parents. But generally speaking, if you're engaged in a mitzvah, as we'll see that again later today, you don't stand for the elder, the Torah scholar that walks by. And if you're working, if you're involved in work, especially work that's paid by the hour, you don't stand for the elder or even the Torah scholar. Now the Gemara asks, and are craftsmen not required to stand before Torah scholars? Really? But didn't we learn in a Mishna in Tractate Bikurim, the bringing of the first fruits when the temple is standing in Jerusalem? When farmers bring their first fruits to Jerusalem, all craftsmen stand before them and greet them and say to them, our brothers from such and such a place, welcome. Since craftsmen would stand even for those engaged in a mitzvah, all the more so should they stand for Torah scholars. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, there's no difficulty here, as indeed the craftsmen of Jerusalem would stand before those bringing first fruits, and yet they would not stand before Torah scholars. Right? So why would they stand before a farmer engaged in a beautiful holy mitzvah, bringing the first fruits to Jerusalem, but not before a Torah scholar? Torah scholars are at such a high level that basically they're engaged in thinking or even teaching Torah wherever they go. If two of them walk by, they're talking Torah almost for sure. So why wouldn't we stand before them? Based on this, Rabbi Yosef Bar Avin says, come and see how beloved is a mitzvah, a commandment performed in its proper time, as the craftsmen stood before those who were fulfilling a mitzvah, whereas they did not stand before Torah scholars. And the Gemara responds, this does not prove that the same applies to all mitzvahs performed in their proper times, as perhaps it is different there with regard to the bringing of the first fruits. For if so, if one does not treat those who bring first fruits with such honor, they will not want to come at all, and you will cause them to stumble in sin in the future. And this is why the sages instituted special honor for those bringing first fruits. This reasoning does not apply to people performing other mitzvahs, right? So craftsmen don't have to stand for anybody who's in the middle of performing a mitzvah. It was a special decree for the people bringing the first fruits to Jerusalem, because not only was it a very special mitzvah that they were doing, and the Torah scholars, the sages of that generation, wanted to encourage people to make sure that they, fulfill that mitzvah, bring the first fruits to Jerusalem. But also it was wonderful for Jerusalem because it was a pilgrimage festival. The people were coming and they were bringing all these first fruits, which were basically used to decorate Jerusalem. Jerusalem became this incredibly beautiful, vibrant place, decorated with all this fruit, beautiful first fruits that were being brought into the city. The master said previously, one might have thought that one should also stand before an elder in the lavatory or in the bathhouse. Therefore, the verse said, you shall stand and you shall revere, which indicates that the mitzvah of standing applies only in a place where there is reverence. There's not reverence in the bathroom, right? The Gemara asks, and does one not show honor in a lavatory? But Rabbi Chia was sitting in a bathhouse, and Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe passed by, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rebbe, and he did not stand before him. And Rabbi Shimon bar Rebbe became angry and went and said to his father, Rebbe, I taught Rabbi Chia two of the 5 parts of the book of Psalms, and yet he did not stand before me. And this indicates that a display of honor is appropriate even in the bathhouse, although the other sage didn't stand. So you can see even the sages disagreed about this. And furthermore, Bar Kapara, and some say it was Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yosef, who was sitting in a bathhouse, and Rabbi Shimon ben Rebbe entered and passed by, and he did not stand before him. Rabbi Shimon became angry and went and said to his father, I taught him 2 of the 9 parts of Torah's Kohanim, the halachic midrash on Leviticus, and yet he did not stand before me. And Rebbe said to his son Rabbi Shimon, well, perhaps he was sitting and contemplating what you taught him and did not see you come in. Now the Gemara explains this proof. The fact that the reason that the one sitting in the bathhouse might have been exempt was that he was sitting and pondering the lessons indicates that if it were not so, if he was not sitting there and contemplating Torah, then Rebbe would not have justified such behavior. One must stand before a sage, even in a bathhouse. But we were told that one does not stand before a sage or an elder in a bathhouse. So what's going on? And the Gemara answers, this is not difficult, la kasha. This law that one is not required to stand in a bathhouse applies to the inner rooms, the locker room, where everyone is naked or where they're actually in the water. Standing in a place of this kind certainly does not bestow honor. You don't want people to stand when they're naked because that's not actually a show of honor. That law that one is obligated to stand in the bathhouse applies to the outer rooms, the lobby, the vestibule, the hallway where people are dressed. There you stand. So the Gemara comments, and so too it is reasonable that this is the correct explanation. As Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, one is permitted to contemplate matters of Torah everywhere except for the bathhouse and the lavatory. That's not a place to think about Torah thoughts. Since Rebbe suggested that the student might have been sitting and pondering his studies, it can be assumed that the episode occurred in a location where only some of the laws governing one's behavior in a bathhouse apply, meaning the outer rooms where people are still dressed. But the Gemara rejects this proof. Perhaps one whose studies are beyond his control is different, and it is possible that he was so absorbed in Torah study that he forgot he was in a place where it is prohibited to think about such sacred matters. It doesn't change the fact that, when you're sitting in the bathroom doing your thing, that is not a place to be thinking or reading about Torah. That's prohibited. Some people are so obsessed with Torah that they might forget themselves, but okay, they made a mistake. They should not be thinking about Torah when they're in the bathroom, or in the presence of a toilet, or in the presence of naked people, etc. It is taught in the same baraisa. One might have thought that one may close his eyes like one who does not see the elder. Therefore, the verse states, before the hoary head you shall stand, and you shall revere the face of an elder, and you shall fear your God. Leviticus 19:32. And the Gemara expresses surprise at this statement. Is that to say that we are dealing with wicked people who would intentionally act this way to avoid fulfilling a mitzvah? If we're talking about people who stand for elders or who stand for Torah scholars, are they really going to avert their eyes or close their eyes so they don't see the scholar or the elder, so that they are, so that they get out of the obligation to stand? Rather, what we're talking about is like this. One might have thought that one may close his eyes before the obligation to stand arrives, i.e. when the elder is still far off. And this would mean that when the obligation does arrive, he won't even know because he won't see him. And that way he won't be required to stand before him. In this manner, he thinks that he can avoid the obligation altogether. He's not shirking it, but he's saying that the obligation won't come up for him. Therefore, the verse states, you shall stand and you shall fear the Lord your God, meaning one should fear that he, God, knows the secrets of one's heart. You might have come up with a good legal justification for you to get out of doing this honor for an elder or a Torah scholar, so don't do that. A sage taught, what is the type of standing that indicates reverence? You must say that this applies when it is clear that one is standing in the elder's honor, which is within 4 cubits of him. Abaye said, we said this halacha, this law, that one must stand within 4 cubits of the elder only with regard to one who is not his primary teacher. But for his primary teacher, he must stand as soon as the teacher enters his range of vision, even if he is more than 4 cubits away. Now the Gemara likewise reports that Abaye would stand as soon as he saw the ear of Rav Yosef's donkey coming toward him. And the Gemara relates Abaye was riding a donkey along the bank of the Sagya River. And Rav Misharshia and other rabbis were sitting on the other bank of the river, and they did not stand before him. And Abaye said to them, am I not your primary teacher? You are therefore required to stand before me, despite the fact that I am far away. And they said to him, that did not enter our minds because we never saw you. We were busy talking, and sorry, we never saw you. Of course we would have stood for you, even from far away. It was further stated in the Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, from where is it derived that an elder should not trouble others to honor him? And the verse states, and you shall revere the face of an elder, and you shall fear your God, right? The and you shall fear your God applies both to the one who shall revere the elder and to the elder himself, right? All people are commanded to fear the Lord their God. Therefore, in terms of the elder, what this means, Abaye said, we have a tradition that if a sage circumnavigates an area so that people will not have to stand before him, the sage will live a long life. And the Gemara relates that Abaye would circumnavigate an area, and likewise Rabbi Zera would circumnavigate an area. All right. In other words, they would go walk the long way around so as not to obligate people to stand for them. In their humility, they didn't need people to stand and honor them, and they didn't but they knew that other people were obligated to do that, so they just walked around so to ease the people's burden. The Gemara cites another incident involving honor that one demonstrates for his teacher. Once, when Ravina was sitting before Rabbi Yirmiyah of Difti, a certain man passed before him and did not cover his head. And Ravina said, "How rude is this man who does not show respect by covering his head in honor of a rabbi?" Now, from here, you learn a few things, that the tradition of covering your head for all Jewish men did not always exist. It is certainly the law now and has been for a very long time, but it wasn't always so. And so there was a time when Torah scholars covered their heads and regular Jews didn't cover their heads, but when they would come into the presence of a Torah scholar, then they would cover their head, and later became the norm at all times. So in that situation, Ravina said, "How rude is this man who does not show respect by covering his head in honor of a rabbi?" And Rabbi Yirmiyah of Difti said to him, "Perhaps he is from the city of Mata Mechasya, where rabbis are common, and the people living there are consequently not as careful to display honor as those in other places." Should always assume good intention, right? If you right away are judging somebody in your mind because you think you know their life and what they're doing and how they're falling short, maybe you should think, well, actually, maybe there's some circumstances I have not considered. Try to give people the benefit of the doubt. It was stated previously that Isi ben Yehuda says that as the verse states, "Before the hoary head you shall stand," it indicates that even anyone of hoary head is included, not only a Torah scholar. Right? We learned that, right? Elders, you stand before an elder, whether a Torah scholar or not. And Rabbi Yochanan said the law is in accordance with the opinion of Isi ben Yehuda. And the Gemara relates, Rabbi Yochanan himself would stand before Aramean elders, right? Not just Jewish elders, but any elders. And he said, how many experiences have occurred to these individuals? It is appropriate to honor them due to the wisdom they have garnered from their long lives, even if they've never studied Torah. And Rava would not stand before them, but he displayed reverence to them in other ways. Abaye would extend a hand to elders so that they could lean on him. Rava would send his agent to help them. Rav Nachman would send officers, his servants, to assist elders. And he said, well, if not for the Torah, how many people named Nachman bar Abba would there be in the marketplace? In other words, I am not permitted to treat my Torah study lightly by assisting passing elders myself. But luckily I have assistants, and I will send them to do this in my place, right? As we've seen before, if you're engaged in a mitzvah like studying Torah, you don't want to interrupt that to do a mitzvah that other people could do for you. And so Rabbi Yochanan or Nachman bar Abba, had resources that he had all these students and assistants, and he could send one of them to go assist the elder who was passing by. Rabbi Ivu says that Rabbi Yanai says, and now we're on 33b, a Torah scholar is permitted to stand before his teacher only once in the morning and once in the evening. So it's not that you stand every single time your teacher comes into the room. Only in the morning and the evening. And why is that? So that the teacher's honor should not be greater than the honor of heaven. As one recites the Shema, which is tantamount to greeting God, once in the morning and once in the evening. How beautiful. Reciting the Shema is tantamount to greeting God. And you do that once in the morning and once in the evening. And the Gemara raises an objection from an aforementioned opinion. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, from where is it derived that an elder should not trouble others to honor him? The verse states, an elder and you shall fear. So the collocation, or, it's an interesting word. I don't think I'm familiar with it. Collocation of these words, the juxtaposition of these words comes to teach that the elder too must fear God, and that's why he circumnavigates. Now the Gemara explains the objection. And if you say that one must stand for his teacher only in the morning and in the evening, why does the Baraisa say that an elder should not trouble others? Standing for an elder only twice a day is an obligation for the people, not an imposition. Rather, is it not correct to say that one is obligated to stand before one's teacher at any point during the day? And the Gemara answers, no. Actually, one is obligated to stand only in the morning and in the evening, and even so, as much as it is possible for the elder, he should not trouble people to stand on his behalf. Rabbi Lazar said any Torah scholar who does not stand before his teacher is called wicked, and he will not live a long life, and his studies will be forgotten, as it is stated, but it shall not be well for the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he does not fear before, milifne, God. This fear mentioned in the verse, I do not know what it is. When the verse states, and you shall revere the face of an elder, and you shall fear your God, one can deduce that this fear mentioned in the verse is referring to standing. Consequently, this verse teaches with regard to one who does not stand that he is called wicked. He will not live a long life, and his studies will be forgotten, as indicated by the phrase, it shall not be well. And the Gemara asks, but why not say that this is referring to fear of God, stated with regard to interest, or the fear of God with regard to weights, Leviticus 25:36 and Deuteronomy 25:13, as fear of God is mentioned with regard to these prohibitions as well. And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Lazar derives this law through the verbal analogy of penei and penei, face, as explained previously, not from the verbal analogy of the term fear. So a dilemma was raised before them, or penei is also before, like before the face or just in front of them, with regard to one who is both a man's son and his teacher, right? If you're such a great Torah scholar that you are the teacher to your father, then what? Who stands for who, right? The son has to stand for the father, but the student has to stand for the teacher. So what do we do? So the Gemara answers come in here, as Shmuel said to Rav Yehuda, Shinana, right? Big tooth one, when he said to him that you had disrespected your father. So he said, Shinana, stand before your father. Although Rav Yehuda was a great Torah scholar and taught his father, he was still required to stand before his father. And the Gemara answers, Rav Yecheskel, Rav Yehuda's father, is different, as he was a man of good deeds, and extremely, like a man filled with good deeds. And even Mar Shmuel himself would stand before him. So the Gemara asks, so that's not a proof, right? So if you have, in that case, Rav Yehuda was a great Torah scholar, but his father was also famous for being such a pious person who was always engaged in doing good. So obviously he has to stand for his father, who is this incredibly righteous elder. But what about a more normal case where you have a great Torah teacher who is teaching Torah to his father? Does the father stand for the teacher, or does the son stand for the father? So the Gemara asks, rather, what is Shmuel saying to Rav Yehuda? If he is not teaching him that one who is his father's teacher must still stand before his father, why did Shmuel say this to Rav Yehuda? And the Gemara answers that this is what Shmuel said to him. Sometimes your father comes from behind me, and I don't see him, and that's why I don't stand for him. Nevertheless, you should stand before him and do not be concerned about my honor. Right? In other words, if you're learning from what's going on here, right? Rav Yehuda is a great Torah scholar. Shmuel is even greater, right? And Yehuda is sitting learning from Shmuel. Yehuda's father enters the room from behind Shmuel. So to stand for someone else in the presence of your own teacher, who's the great teacher of the generation, might seem disrespectful to your teacher, Shmuel. Nevertheless, says Shmuel to Rav Yehuda, stand for your father when he walks in behind me. I would have stood also, except I didn't see him, and don't worry about my honor that you're standing. Another dilemma was raised before them with regard to one who is both a man's son and his teacher. What is the law as to whether the father must stand before the son? And the Gemara answers, So we've been asking, should the son stand for the father if the son is the father's teacher? Now we're asking, should the father stand for the son, given that the son is his teacher? With regard to one who is both the man's son and his teacher, what is the law as to whether the father must stand before the son? And the Gemara answers, come in here. As Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, it is not appropriate for me to stand before my son solely due to his greatness in Torah, as I am greater than him. But due to the honor of the household of the Nasi, I do stand before him, as his son was the son-in-law of the Nasi. Now, it may be inferred from here that if his son were not in the household of the Nasi, he would not stand for him. And the reason was that he could claim, I am his teacher, and therefore I am not obligated to stand before him. Accordingly, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is indicating that if he were my teacher, I would stand before him. And the Gemara rejects this proof. This is what Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is saying. You've got this wrong. This is what he's actually saying. It is not appropriate for me to stand before my son, even if he were my teacher, as I am his father. But due to the honor of the household of the Nasi, I do stand before him. Right? So you can read this a couple different ways. Basically, a father does not stand for his son. If his son is teaching him Torah, maybe, but probably not still, because a father doesn't stand for his son. But if the son not only teaches Torah, but represents the authority of, the greatest house of Torah in Israel, the house of the Nasi, in this case, the son who's also a Torah teacher also happens to be the son-in-law of the Nasi, then the father might stand for his son in that situation. A dilemma was raised before them. What is the law as to... A dilemma was raised before them. If one's teacher is riding on an animal, is that considered like walking, and therefore one must stand before him? Or is he not obligated to stand before his teacher because his teacher is actually stationary relative to the animal? The teacher is not walking. The teacher is sitting. He's sitting on a horse that's moving, but he's sitting. So do we stand for your teacher when your teacher is sitting and riding by on a horse? That's the question. Abaye said, come and hear a resolution from a different area of the law. If a metzora, one afflicted with saras, is ritually, in that which makes him ritually impure, tameh, and he transfers his tuma, his ritual impurity, through a tent, i.e. anyone who enters the location of the metzora is rendered tameh, impure, in the situation where the tameh person, the one who is the metzora, right? He has this skin outbreak, tzaras, which makes him impure. Now, if he touches you, he makes you impure. If he's just a few feet away from you, he does not make you impure. If both of you are under a roof, right? Like you're in a tent, or you're even under the branches of a tree, like you're in a room together for this purposes, right? This is tumas oihel, right? Like the impurity that is transmitted by being in the same room with a person. So if you're in the same room with a corpse, for sure you become tameh. If you're in the same room with a metzora, interestingly, you don't become tameh unless the person with tzaras, the metzora, is sitting. If he's just walking through, then he's not settled in that tent the way a corpse would be, since the corpse can't move. So if the metzora is walking through, or even just standing still, nonetheless, he doesn't transmit the tumah to you by being under the same roof as you. But if he's sitting and you're sitting under, even if you're standing, I think, but if he's sitting and you're inside that room with him, then you do get tumah. You don't get tzaras, right? Tzaras is not contagious that way, but you do become tameh, and you have to go through the purification of one who contracted tumah. Where am I? Right, and that's what he's explaining. So if a metzora who is tameh and transfers tumah through a tent, i.e. anyone who enters the location of the metzora is rendered impure, if he's sitting under the branches of a tree which form a tent over him, and a pure person is standing under the tree, the pure person is rendered impure, is rendered tameh, because the metzora is sitting. If the tameh person is standing under the tree and the pure person is sitting, he remains pure. In this case, because the Tameh person is not settled there. And so therefore he does not impart his tumah, his ritual impurity, in a tent. But if the impure person sat and established his place there, then the pure individual who's in that room, whether he's sitting or standing with the sitting Mitzorah, then he also becomes impure. And that Mishnah adds, and the same law applies with regard to a stone afflicted with a tsaras, like a house can be afflicted with tsaras, which also imparts impurity of a tent. If one carrying a stone of this kind sits under a tree, a pure person standing under the tree is rendered impure. Whereas if the person carrying the stone stands, he does not render the other individual impure. And Rav Nachman Bar Cohen says, that is to say, that riding is considered like walking, as although the stone is stationary relative to the person, it is considered to be moving. Conclude from it that in all cases, riding is like walking. That if your teacher rides by, even though he's sitting on a horse, he's moving by and you stand for him, just as you would if he walked by. A dilemma was raised before them. What is the law as to whether one should stand before a Torah scroll? This we're very familiar with even modern times, right? If you're in synagogue and it's time for the Torah reading, they take the Torah scroll out of the ark to bring it to the bima, to bring it to the shulchan, the table where they're going to put it down for reading of the Torah publicly. While it's being carried from the ark to the table, everybody stands. And when the Torah becomes settled again, then we sit. If a person is holding a Torah scroll and he's walking, we stand. Once the person holding the Torah scroll sits, we sit. A dilemma was raised before them. What is the halacha of whether one should stand before a Torah scroll? And Rabbi Hilkiah and Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Lazar say that this dilemma can be resolved by a kal v'chomer inference. If one stands before those who study the Torah scholars, is it not all the more so that one should stand before the Torah itself? And the Gemara relates, Rabbi Eli and Rabbi Yaakov Bar Zavdi were sitting and studying Torah, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba passed before them, and they stood before him. Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba said to them, you are not obligated to do this for two reasons. One reason is that you are ordained scholars, and I am only an associate, i.e., meaning he had not been ordained. And furthermore, does the Torah stand before those who study it? Since you are engaged in Torah study at the present moment, you are not required to stand before a Torah scholar. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba, right, he's a rabbi. Why is he saying he's not ordained? Well, he was technically not ordained. He had a lot of unfortunate circumstances in his life. And though he certainly was a teacher, he sadly, and he was a disciple of the great Rabbi Yochanan, but there was an unfortunate chain of circumstances we'll learn another time. And so Rabbi Yochanan never formally ordained him, and it was just a sadness for him. I'm very close to done. Questions or comments, please get them in. The Gemara comments, Rabbi Shimon Bar Abba holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Lazar. As Rabbi Lazar says, a Torah scholar may not stand before his teacher when he is studying Torah because he is engaged in honoring the Torah itself. And the Gemara adds, even so, Abaye cursed anyone who acted in accordance with this ruling, as he would give the appearance of one who disrespected his teacher. Better, you should find a reason to pause for a moment, stand for your teacher, and resume your studies, and make sure that you're not disrespecting neither the Torah nor your teacher. And the Gemara continues to discuss the mitzvah of standing before a Torah scholar. With regard to the verse, and they looked after Moses until he was gone into the tent. Exodus 33:8. Now this would seem to indicate that when Moses walked by, people stood, which they did, and they would remain standing until he entered his tent. So it seems like, okay, well that's a good source for why we stand for Torah scholars. Now, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yitzchak Nepacha disputed the correct interpretation of this verse. One said that this verse was actually speaking unfavorably of those who, quote, looked after Moses until he was gone into the tent. And the other one in this debate said that it was stated favorably about the people who looked after Moses until he was gone into the tent. So the one who stated it unfavorably, one stated it unfavorably and one said it favorably. Now the one who stated it unfavorably explains the verse as it is interpreted in the Midrash. And that says elsewhere in the Midrash that what does it mean that the people were looking at Moses as he walked by? It means that they were gossiping about him, right? Shh, there goes Moses. And Moses would walk by and then they'd be whispering about him. And we see that there's a story, right, where Miriam and even the great Miriam and Aaron were punished because the Midrash says they were talking about Moses, and that is just very briefly, what their complaint about Moses was. Miriam's complaint about Moses was that he had sort of abandoned his wife. He didn't leave her for another woman, God forbid, but because Moses had to be ready for prophecy at any moment, literally any time of the day, God could say, Moses, I want to talk with you. And since we learned that before Mount Sinai, everybody had to stay away from their wives for 3 days, right? No marital relations, so that you would be in a state of purity, ready to literally be in the presence of the Lord, the revealed presence of the Lord. So Moses felt like he couldn't, have marital relations with his wife anymore, so that he would always be ready. And Miriam was saying, he shouldn't do that. He shouldn't do that. He's, it's not fair to her to support to his wife. But she was talking about him, and Aaron was listening. And so from that, we learn out, that people were gossiping about Moses. And maybe, if Miriam and Aaron were doing it, according to that Midrash, then, who knows how many people in the camp were doing that. And so this verse is speaking unfavorably about the people. But the other one in this debate is saying, okay, that verse is not talking about gossiping or Lashon Hara at all. It's saying that when Moses walked by, the people stood up and they remained standing until he finished passing by. And probably you could make the case that, well, there were 2 million people in the camp and tons of them, maybe most of them, maybe 99.9999% of them, were incredibly respectful to Moses. But we also know that the people were difficult. And so there must have been individuals in the camp that were more in the other course of behavior. Now, the one who said it, that this verse was stated favorably, interprets the verse in accordance with that which Chizkiah says. And what does Chizkiah say? Rabbi Hanina, the son of Rabbi Abahu, said to me that Rabbi Abahu says that Rabbi Avdimi of Haifa says, if a Torah scholar is passing, one stands before him, if he passes within 4 cubits of him, and once he passes 4 cubits from him, once he is 4 cubits past, then the person can sit. Now, if the president of the court is passing, one stands before him as soon as he comes within the range of vision. And once he passes 4 cubits from him, he sits. And if the nasi, right, the head of the Sanhedrin, the gadol of the generation, is passing, one stands before him as soon as he comes within the range of vision, and he does not sit until the nasi sits in his place, as it is stated, and they looked after Moses until he was gone into the tent, and only afterward did they sit. According to this interpretation, the verse is praising the behavior of the Jews, and we learn from that if a great Torah scholar comes in, we stand as soon as we see him, and we don't sit until he sits or he's totally gone from our vision. That's what I've got for us today. Let's take some comments or questions on Erev Rosh Hashanah. Marjorie. Co-location, transitive and intransitive, meaning to locate 2 or more things close to each other. As we know in Hebrew and Aramaic, location means a lot. Location. Absolutely right. Okay. And just double checking that that's all the questions. Yes, it is. My friends, today was the 1350th page of the Talmud that we're learning together. out of 2,711. And that means that we are less than a week away from the halfway point of our 7.5-year Daf Yomi journey. Wow. May you be blessed with a sweet Shabbos and such a sweet Rosh Hashanah, and may it be the head of a sweet year. May this year bless you and all your loved ones with perfect health, unlimited livelihood, exponential growth in all the areas of your life that you want to grow in. May you be showered in love, blessings, prosperity, health, intellectual prowess, every good thing. And may this be the day that Mashiach arrives and redeems the world and elevates us all to a much higher state when the presence of the Lord will be revealed in this world. We say Amen. Good Shabbos and L'Shana Tova Umetuka. May you have a good and sweet year. All the best.